Hello everyone, I'm MVL and welcome to this game room tour. In this video we're going to check out my main game room with tons of systems and around 2,000 games. We're going to talk about the changes to the game room since I have moved in to this new game room, and we're going to check out my consoles and take a look at the games on the shelves as well. And I'm going to pick out some random games to show up in closer detail as well. But I'm not going to pick out every single game, otherwise this video will never end. But this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to show you a lot of great games, so I hope you enjoy it. First of all, we have a bunch of screens over here. Only one of these screens is actually superfluous, and that would be the Philips CRT TV on the far left there. Since I moved in, I was finally able to get a new Sony Trinitron after I unfortunately damaged my last one in transit, and finally I have a replacement for that, which I'm very happy about because I wouldn't consider the game room complete without a Sony Trinitron. Let's take a look at the consoles right here. I just added this new shelving device here to home many of the consoles which are connected to these screens that you can see to the right of that. And I'm pretty happy with this setup. I will also say that I have moved my PC gaming stuff from the other game room into this game room for this game room tour because I just added some shelves into the game room and I didn't want to have those blank and empty for this game room tour, so I wanted to show the PC games together in one video because I thought that would be easy. And what is great about this setup right now is you can see all of my devices connected, and they are connected to some of these consoles right here. You have the Mega CD there. There is my modded Sega Mega Drive, which was modded by Scodico Retro to do different regions. There's my Retro Freak, which I use to do a lot of different systems, and that's a great system because it does HDMI out and tons of systems on that. There's the Master System Model 2, and there is the Master System Converter, which I actually use to play my Master System games most of the time on my Mega Drive. There's the NES right there, that is modded with a blinking light win to be a front loader, and that works really well. I did a video on that. And there's my Super Nintendo, PAL Super Nintendo of course. All of my consoles for the most part are PAL consoles. There's my Nintendo 64, also modded by Scodico Retro, and that's great. And there's my Nintendo GameCube, and that also has the GameCube Game Boy player attached as well. I also have the Game Boy player for the Super Nintendo, but the GameCube Game Boy player is fantastic. There's my Wii, and I also have an American Wii there as well, which is modded to play Japanese games. There's my Nintendo Switch, and there's an Atari 2600. Here's my CRT screens here and my flat screen, and that's a Panasonic flat screen. It's actually pretty good to have an older flat screen, a HD ready flat screen, and what's great about that is it can play all of the different resolutions, whereas if you had a more modern TV like a 4K TV, maybe it would not be able to handle the lower resolutions like 240p. You've got my Wii U there, my PlayStation 2, and you've got my PlayStation 3 and my Sega Saturn below that on these TV units. And then below that we have the Sega Dreamcast and my PlayStation 4. Now I don't have a PlayStation 5 as of the making of this video. I'm not sure where I would put an extra system. I have a little bit of extra space on this unit right here where I could probably add something. Maybe not a PlayStation 5 because that system is massive, but I am hoping to add a Evercade VS, which I have on the way to this unit over here, which houses my TurboGrafx 16 power model, which unfortunately can't have the CD attachment, the real Panasonic 3DO, and my Philips CDI. Some of the more uncommon systems are on that unit over there. And then there's my flat screen, which I spoke about previously. Above that you have my Xbox Connect and my PlayStation 3 Move and my Wii Sensor Bar. There's my original Xbox, and there's my Xbox 360 that I'm currently using, and there's the Xbox One at the bottom there as well. In front of that we have a uncommon system here. This is the Vectrix, and it works, although the cartridge input currently does not work for that. In front of that as well we have my capture device, which is an Elgato HD60S, and I use that to capture many of my game systems, and with that I use some of these devices here to produce things into HDMI. You've got things like the RetroTink converters and the Rad2X, which are absolutely great. There's my computer right there. This computer does most of my work in editing and videos and things like that. And there is a Philips monitor there, personal video monitor with the Commodore 64 dataset on top of that. There's my currently working Commodore 64 and Amiga 500 there as well. Computers that I just love and I've had for forever, and they're brilliant. I think they're amazing. And here are some shelving right here, and to the left here we have some more mini systems, some more modern systems, and below that we have my PC, which is a Vortex PC from PC Specialist. And thanks to people in the comments of my unboxing video to that, I know how to change the RGB lights. We've got a bunch of plug and plays here. We have a Capcom one there and a Namco one. And there's a Space Invaders plug and play there, which is absolutely brilliant. And then below that we have some more modern units like the Sega Mega Drive Mini, the NES Mini, the SNES Mini, the TurboGrafx Mini as well. And then you have the Game & Watch, the Mario one, and the Zelda Game & Watch, which I just got, which is pretty cool as well. The back of that lights up with a Triforce symbol. We have the Commodore 64 Mini, the Neo Geo Mini, and the Astro City Mini here as well. Those are fantastic. And you also have the Retrobit Retrocade. And below that, we have a Pong unit and a couple of Xbox 360, the Gears of War, the Star Wars one, and then I have an American Super Nintendo there and a PS2 in silver and things like that. Here's a couple of handheld units. You have the Evercade, the PSP, and DSs and things like that. And then below that you have these storage containers where I put my controllers and those ottomans to either side of my couch, which is pretty handy. We're going to go on to my Nintendo loose cartridges here. You saw Game Genie above that. And this is where I keep my loose cartridges. My boxed games I keep in a different location, and we'll see that later in the video. But a bunch of great NES games lined up on these shelves. These shelves are actually new for this video. In my previous game room tour you would not have seen these. I've moved around, grabbed some extra shelves and tried to organize this section a little better so that the cartridges, not only can I fit more of them on the shelves, but I can display them and access them a little better, and I'm pretty happy about that, especially when it comes to the Game Boy cartridges. Man, NES games, I just love collecting these. It's the feel of them, the look of them, and also just how cool they are. A fantastic system for the retro gaming era, and it's really fun to pick up these games, even though in my area it's a little hard to grab NES games, especially at a good price, but there's some fantastic games out there. The Guardian Legend here, this is a PAL version, and this game is absolutely amazing. It's part platformer, top down I should say, and part shmup, so that's fantastic. Here's my Super Nintendo games and a couple of American Super Nintendo games at the bottom there. You can see our PAL Super Nintendo games have nothing on the end label, which is really awkward, but that's just how they look, unfortunately. Makes it a little difficult to organize them and see what everything is. Same for the N64 when you're speaking of that as well. Here's my Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advanced, and then we have my Sega games and my Atari games. Here's a couple of Famicom games right here, and then we have a couple of Super Famicom games there, which is awesome. Space Hunter there is a Metroid style game. Very cool, very interesting game if you wanted to check that out. And then here we have the Street Fighter 2 Super Famicom. Pretty cool to have that. I want to get more Super Famicom and Famicom games as well and be able to play those. I can play those on my Retro Freak as well. There's the N64 games right there. There's my Super Game Boy for the Super Nintendo above my Game Boy cartridge housing there. This is relatively new, these containers here that I've placed above the other storage items for my cartridges, loose cartridges as well. I have a lot of Sega boxed games as well, which I'll show later in the video so you can see those. And also you can see my Atari 2600 games. You may see multiples here, and often I have a PAL copy and an American copy of these games. I had a lot of American games brought over from America in a bundle, so I have a couple of duplicates. And here you can see my Game Boy and Game Boy Color games right here, and then the Game Boy Advanced. These are a little awkward to organize, but I have them in alphabetical order as best I can to access them. But I think putting them out that way is better than putting them in a drawer and having them all completely disheveled and disorganized. And there you have the Sega Game Gear games, the Master System games previous to that, and Sega Mega Drive games here, which are all different shapes and sizes, which I really love. I like it when you have that kind of variation as well. And then there's my Game Genie there, which I use to play Japanese games on my modern Mega Drive because the cartridge slot hasn't been adjusted. And then we have my 2600 games. You can see some of them have the P next to the name, which means they're PAL versions. And several of these are a little bit damaged, but take into account that they are very, very old. So that will be the case. And the labels are in different states of looking good and completely being missing. But they are fantastic games on the Atari 2600. And it's a great system to play as well. Here's Dyna Blaster, which is a really cool game on the Game Boy. I'm just going to pick out a couple of random games to show you. Here's Fortified Zone. If I was to show you every single game, this video would never end. So I will show you a couple of the cool ones, but certainly there'll be other great games. You can check out my full game list with most of my games on it in a website link I will provide for Darkadia, which is how I catalog my game collection. And that won't include some of the PAL games, which are not on that list, unfortunately. But there's a lot of great games, as you can see here. Perfect Dark there has a rumble feature included, which uses a battery. For the Game Boy Advance, we have Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Final Fantasy Tactics is a fantastic game. Love the Game Boy Advance. It's like a portable Super Nintendo. There's Metroid Zero Mission, and this game, with the Switch Metroid game, which has just come out, Metroid Dread, at the time of this video. Metroid Dread is extremely expensive, and so are a lot of Pokemon games as well, for that matter. Very sought after. Here's a couple of TurboGrafx 16 games. Now, all of these are American games, but my PAL TurboGrafx 16 will play them. It will just force them to run at the PAL speed. And here's a couple of Sega MyCard games for the Master System. And talking about Master System, here's Bomber Raid, which looks like it's been through a Bomber Raid, which I really like. I don't know why the Master System cartridges have a space for an end label at the top, but don't have an end label. There's a Game Gear game, Haley Wars, which is a shmup. Love this game, it's really cool. Some of the Master System games are also on the Game Gear, and you can pick and choose what you want, but often it's cheaper to get them on the Game Gear. There's Fireshark, another great shmup. Really cool to have that. I have a couple of these cartridge protectors as well, and I have a lot of box protectors on my boxed games as well. You come see that later. Here's Splatterhouse 3. Similar to Bomber Raid, Splatterhouse 3 looks like it's been chewed up by some kind of monster, which is appropriate. That's an American Genesis game. The bulk of my Sega Mega Drive games are Mega Drive games and not Genesis games because I'm in the PAL region. But I have since got a modified console, thanks to Scottico Retro, that can play games at the proper speed from American systems. So speaking of Sega, we're going to take a look here at some Sega games going through the ages here, all the way up to their final home console, the Dreamcast. We've got the Mega CD there, and then the Sega Saturn. I, for some reason, have a hard time finding Sega Saturn games out in the wild, so I don't have a ton of them right now, but it is a system I am definitely looking out for. And then we have the Dreamcast as well. My Dreamcast currently does not work very well. I need to get that system replaced, but I do love getting Dreamcast games, and Shenmue, fantastic game on the Dreamcast. One of my favorite games. Such a unique game, and such a game ahead of its time as well. So we're going to take a look at some of these games in detail here. We have the Nights into Dreams, a holiday version of this game for the Sega Saturn. That came free of a magazine. Very cool to have that. And then for the Dreamcast, here's Zombie Revenge, which is a really interesting game. It's got shooter elements, it's got beat 'em up elements. It's really cool. So we're going to move into my boxed Sega games here for the older systems, the Master System and the Mega Drive. And at the bottom there we have some Evercade games. I love the Master System, even though often the box art for these games can be a little crazy. You do get some really awesome box art for these games as well. And they're just really good games. It's such a great system. Some of the 8-bit games on that system are so good, you would think they're 16-bit. We also have Sega Mega Drive games here as well. I've got a bunch of good Mega Drive games, some newer ones as well, like Generals of the Yang family there as well. Modern ports of these games, modern re-releases have come out. And then I have the one or two different games, like I have a bootleg of Raiden Trad, for example, which is between Philios there and Revolution X. And yeah, the Mega Drive is a fantastic system. Some of my most favorite games are on this system for sure. It's such a good console. And then below that we have newer games for the Evercade. Many of these are compilation cartridges. And as I mentioned the Evercade earlier, I am getting the Evercade VS, which is their home console version. I had the handheld you might have seen for a moment earlier in the video. And yeah, I'm loving this system. It's really cool to get physical copies of retro games in these compilations. These are cartridge trays for the Nintendo. I just happen to have two of these I picked up a while ago, but I do keep my Nintendo games as you saw elsewhere. And there's some 3DO long boxed games. I have the CD sized games elsewhere. There's Sewer Shark, pretend it's a game. We also have Night Trap here. Until we got a recent re-release of this on modern systems, that was the best home console version of that, I believe. So let's take a look at some Master System games here. There's Golden Axe, which is, well, it's not as good as the 16-bit version, but it's still cool. I just love the box art on many of these as well. Check out Sugaya here. Look at that box art. You often get some not so good box art on the Master System, but that one looks really good. I enjoy that quite a lot. It was next to Scramble Sprites there, another cool game. Check out Shadow of the Beast. This is some heavy metal box art right here. That's just amazing. That's what I want to see on my box art. That kind of 80s metal style. Taking a look at Mega Drive here, we've got Arrow Flash. I picked up a bunch of great Mega Drive boxed games in one bundle, which included Arrow Flash, Rolling Thunder 2, and the Chaos Engine at one point, as well as a Castlevania game I'm about to show you. There's Blades of Vengeance. Look at the sun damage on this box. It's absolutely crazy. Must have been a sticker covering one point that saved it, but the rest of it got extremely sun faded. There's Castlevania The New Generation, which elsewhere was known as Castlevania Bloodlines. This game has become more expensive as of late, but speaking of expensive games, check out the Classic Collection here, which is a PAL compilation that came out. It includes Gunstar Heroes, which by itself costed more than this collection did, and that was a pretty good way to pick that game up, actually. It's cheaper than getting the game by itself, plus you get a bunch of other great games on it. Here's Ghosts and Goblins here, the Japanese version. Absolutely fantastic artwork on that case. And here's Splatterhouse 2 in the box, which is fantastic. Splatterhouse 3 only came out overseas for myself, so that's why I have a Genesis cartridge for that. Speaking of overseas, I have a Genesis cartridge of Streets of Rage 1, but I normally played that on the Mega Games compilation. But speaking of game compilations, we have Evercade compilations here. There's the Mega Cat Studio compilations. These are absolutely fantastic. They're physical cartridges for the systems, and they have a ton of games on them. There's the Pico Collection 1, which features a bunch of games from overseas that were maybe translated or licensed and brought into that collection, which is amazing. Here's the Nintendo games over here. We have Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, GameCube, and Wii there. Moving on to Wii U, and of course their modern system, the Switch. So, a couple of box games here, most of which are in box protectors to keep them well, to keep them secure and so that they don't get damaged. Because of these cardboard boxes that many of these systems use, they get damaged more easily than the clamshell-like cases that Sega used. Those plastic video VHS style cases were a lot better on Sega, in my opinion, because these cardboard cases got damaged very easily, and often they were thrown away, which is why it's harder to find games boxed and in good condition for the Nintendo systems. There's the GameCube. These are PAL cases. The Nintendo GameCube cases are very strange, like the logo is at the bottom, it's upside down, but then we have strange cases in the PAL region as well when it comes to things like the PlayStation 2, which you'll see in a moment. Here's the Wii games. We've got Pandora's Tower there, which I think always stands out because it has that black case. It looks really nice. And a couple of other case variations there as well, like the new Super Mario Bros. Wii actually has a red case, but I have a white case there. They were both cases, but the label is red as well. But speaking of red, we're going to move on to their modern systems like the Switch, but we have the Wii U there as well. and the Switch. I've been getting into Switch a lot recently. I love the physical aspect of collecting for that system in an age where so many systems are trying to push the consumer to digital games. The Switch, you can often find physical games. If you look at places like PlayAsia and get overseas versions, you can get a lot of physical versions. For the Nintendo, here's Lolo 2. This is a fantastic puzzle game. I love that game. It's absolutely amazing. And we're also going to take a look at a Famicom game here. This is Super Xevious. It's upside down there. It's in a kind of weird case, but I actually wish that they'd used these kind of plastic cases overseas as well. There's Arkanoid. Do it again. I have a bunch of these aftermarket cases for Super Nintendo games that I got at Biggie's Games and DVDs. I believe they had a bunch of these, and I think it's a really cool way of putting a loose cartridge in a case. There's Illusion of Time. I also have Secret of Evermore there, and Starwing, which was our Star Fox. It would have been really cool if we did get plastic cases for the Super Nintendo, and I think it's perfectly fine to box up your loose cartridges in display cases like this with the artwork on it, because it looks really nice. That's why I've kept these in these cases. They look really cool. There's a Super Famicom game right there, and I can actually play Super Famicom games with English translation patches if I would like to on the Retro Freak, which is really cool. There's Aiden Chronicles, the first made for the Nintendo 64, also in a plastic case. And there is our Perfect Dark. I actually upgraded the box of that a while ago, so I had a better box than the one I previously had. There's Pokemon Stadium. I actually do have the transfer pack for that. It should be in there. That all of these, well, most of those were for the Nintendo 64 were my original boxes. There is Xena, the Warrior Princess. This is an example of these box protectors making the cartridge, the box look better. As you can see, that box is not in good shape, but the cartridge protector from My Game Vault kept it together very nicely. There's a Harvest Moon there, and there's Mario Kart Double Dash. I often pull this one out because the PAL version of this, which includes the Zelda bonus disc, had nothing other than a sticker on it to tell you that. So you'd have to look inside if it didn't have the sticker to know that it had that Zelda bonus disc in there. Got the Wii here. Here's Ju-On the Grudge, the Fright Simulator. Despite the cover art of this game, it's actually pretty cool, although it could be described a bit like a horror walking simulator, because there's not a ton of interaction you have in the game. It's still really fun if you're a fan of horror movies like The Grudge. There's Pandora's Tower. I spoke about that earlier, about how awesome that look. It's Project Zero 2, and here is Project Zero 4 on the Wii, which did not come out overseas. That's Japanese only, but there is a translation community patch for that, and I can play that on my modded American Wii. It has to be an American Wii of a certain kind. I actually did a video explaining how that is done as well. And here's a bunch of Resident Evil games on the Wii. The Resident Evil 4 Wii edition is the only way I will play that game because of the Wii controls are so good. There's a cool shooter game, House of the Dead Overkill as well, which is also on the PlayStation 3. For the Wii U, there's a very rare Project Zero game, or at least it used to be until it got re-released recently. Maiden of Black Water. I have the special edition of this, and I keep my special edition games, I take the game out of the case, and I keep the boxed packaging elsewhere so I can easily get to the games. There's a bunch of Switch games there. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is a fantastic RPG, and there's the Torna Golden Country expanded story to that. It also included a DLC for the expansion pass. Content of the previous game, which I wish was on the cartridge as well, which is kind of weird to say. Here's the PlayStation 2. Look at how hideous the PlayStation 2 PAL boxes look like. There's no way around it. These cases don't look good. I used to do videos standing in front of, or being in front of the PlayStation 2 cases, and I remember at one point someone remarked that they thought I was in front of a bunch of barcodes, and they kind of look like that. I could totally understand that. There's not a lot of colourfulness to these cases. They're all black and white, which is a very weird choice, but it is what it is. These are the PAL copies. They're what I have. The American copies were a lot more colourful, in at least the text on the spines, and it's not a good look. It's fine, but it does look very bland, but that's what we had. Also, it's been said a lot that the PAL versions of the games are not always the best versions. They run at 50 Hz, where the American versions run at 60 Hz, and if the game was not converted properly, as many games weren't, they will run differently, which is a shame. So I am looking at ways to be able to run American games or Japanese games for systems going forward. That's something I'm going to be looking at. But I'm also a physical game collector, so I like to have the physical versions of games I want to play. So, for the most part, my collection is of the region I am in. Because I'm in the UK, I'm going to mostly get those games because those are the games that I can get to hand. I like to mostly grab games that I can go out and find and add to my collection, rather than order things online. It's a lot more fun to find stuff and the thrill of discovery than it is to just order online, in my opinion. Anyway, let's speak of some PS2 games here. We have the .hack games there. I have the first two. They both come with DVDs in them, which is pretty cool as well. Here's another collection of games. The Capcom Classics Collection has some great games included on that. Here's Clock Tower 3, survival horror game on the PlayStation 2. Very cool, very fun. I do like my survival horror games, as you will see throughout this. Devil May Cry actually began life as Resident Evil 4 and became its own thing. Dynasty Warriors, I absolutely love these hack and slash games. They're so much fun. It's a game series that has spanned many, countless entries actually, such as Final Fantasy. There's Final Fantasy X on the PlayStation 2 there as well. We're going to look at my PlayStation 1 games, by the way, later in the video because they're on different shelving. Everyone's been talking about the recent Grand Theft Auto collection of PS2 games that have been released on the PlayStation 4 onwards, but there's the PS2 collection there. Half-Life 2 actually on the PlayStation 2 is a better version than what was originally released on the PC, at least graphically, control-wise, is debatable. Yeah, so there's Max Payne as well, another great game. Doesn't look as good on the PS2 as it does on the PC. There's Code Veronica as well, Resident Evil games, bunch of Resident Evil games. By the way, Haunting Grounds I showed previously over there actually started out life as a Clock Tower game. Resident Evil Outbreak, these games are so good and they're so underrepresented by Resident Evil fans. Dead Aim there and Survivor there, the Gun Survivor games, fantastic games as well. There's Rumble Roses. If you're a big fan of the WWF SmackDown games, it was built on the same engine as Here Comes the Pain. Silent Hill here, and Silent Hill 2 and 3, absolutely amazing games, really good games. Silent Hill 2, such a fantastic game. You want to talk about if games can be art, I think that game just shows the gameplay. If you're looking at modern games as being better for graphical, you've got to look back at games like Silent Hill 2, and then, even go as far back as you want. You're going to find games that the gameplay is the key aspect right there. Anyway, we're moving on to PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4, speaking of modern games, and then PSP and a small amount of PlayStation Vita games at the bottom there as well. Looking at the PlayStation 3 games here, and trying not to move on to as many tangents as I have seemingly moved on to. A great bunch of games on the PlayStation 3, and seeing as the PlayStation 3 is moving further into the past, I wouldn't myself consider it retro, but many people would. It's getting a lot cheaper to get PlayStation 3 games, even though PlayStation 3 I don't believe has any online capabilities anymore. I could be wrong, but I know that Sony wanted to take that offline because this is the problem as we move into the digital age. I'm going off on a tangent again, that a lot of games aren't complete without their digital expansions and things like that. And that becomes a problem when these games get a minute old, because then they're suddenly not supported anymore and you can't get this digital content, which is a problem you're going to see moving on with PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and I imagine particularly PlayStation 5. But yeah, that's something you've got to deal with. So it just depends how far as a physical collector you want to go. Definitely with digital games in the future at this time, it's becoming a lot harder to be a physical game collector. PSP here, going back on subject, fantastic system. Absolutely love the PSP. I love that the later models of it could connect to the TV by a component cable. The 2000 and 3000 model, slim and light, and the 3000. The PlayStation Vita, it had the PlayStation TV, which I have, but it couldn't play all of the games on the TV. I think that was a missed opportunity to not make a PlayStation Vita with a HDMI out. That would have been so good. Or at least use the PlayStation Vita as a controller for the PlayStation TV. Then you could play all of the games. It just feels like a massive missed opportunity. We're speaking of some games here as well. You've got Galgun there, which is an on-rails type game. We've got Ghostblade HD there, which is a great shmup. A lot of great games coming out for the PlayStation 4 and the Switch from places like Limited Run Games, that smaller print runs and more uncommon games, really cool. But more popular games here like Resident Evil Village came out recently. I love that game. Good return to form. Got Castlevania the Dracula X Chronicles here on the PSP. It also includes an unlockable version of the PlayStation 1 game, which is very cool. Got a bunch of Final Fantasy games here on the PSP. Got Final Fantasy here. Final Fantasy 2, that's a Japanese version, but it will play in English if you put it in an English PSP, which is really cool. You got Final Fantasy 4 there, the complete collection, and you got Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Line there as well. Space Invaders Evolution here, but Space Invaders Extreme, an absolutely amazing version of Space Invaders. I love Space Invaders, guys, and if you love Space Invaders and you haven't played Space Invaders Extreme, you're going to be in for a treat if you try that game. Now here we have the original Xbox games. It's not called the original Xbox One, that's the first version of the Xbox One, which is very confusing. And then we have the Xbox 360, which is the Xbox 2, and then the Xbox One, which is the Xbox 3. It's very confusing. Here's the original Xbox games. Now, at the time of this recording, they have celebrated a milestone, a anniversary of the original Xbox release, and they've added more games to the Xbox Series. Yes, that's it, Series. You've got the Series S, which is their all-digital version, as I spoke about them pushing people into digital gaming, and the Xbox Series X, which can take discs, but I think the discs are just DRM, Digital Rights Management. I think they just download stuff from them. I'm not sure any actual content for the Xbox Series X is on Xbox Series X discs. I think they are Xbox One games, which is the third Xbox. This is very confusing. Games, if you put them into Series X. I think that's correct. Someone correct me if I'm wrong, or also get confused, it's fine. Anyway, original Xbox. I love this system. At its console generation when it was out, it had the best graphical games at the time. Also great games like the Call of Cthulhu there, Dark Corners of the Earth. What a great game. What a hidden gem. Such a great game there. You got Dead or Alive. They really tried to push the game in the Japanese market, which they always struggled on for Xbox, for Microsoft in particular, I should say. They put this game out. I believe it was known well for bouncing. I'll just leave it at that. And you got Fable here, one of their original games here that came from Lionhead Studios when they were around. Fable also got a DLC of sorts, the Lost Chapters. This version includes that on the disc as well. Halo there, map pack actually on the disc there, which is pretty cool for Halo 2. But it also had games like Gun Valkyrie, which were just really awesome. Like, a lot of people think of Xbox as like the Halo system, but there's so many good games out that you just have to look for. It had the best versions of a lot of games as well, like Project Zero and Silent Hill. A lot of the definitive console versions because of its more powerful hardware nature. There's Shenmue 2 here. You can actually think of the original Xbox as a spiritual successor of the Dreamcast, and Shenmue 2 moved over to that. There's Silent Hill 2 Inner Fears, and Silent Hill 4 The Room as well. Great games. Here we have a bunch of Star Wars games, Jedi Knight Academy, and Outcast there as well as Knights of the Old Republic. If you put that game into an Xbox One, you will get an upgraded version. It will look fantastic. It's really cool that they did that. And yes, Worms 3D here, fantastic multiplayer game. I actually did want to speak of what they call backwards compatibility, and it's actually, it downloads a cloud version of a game if you put the disc in. But it's very cool that they did that, and they did add more games to that with their anniversary. They're not going to add any more, unfortunately. They've reached the limit of what they will do for that. But it's still very cool that you can play a lot of your original Xbox games, your Xbox 360 games, and the like, on your current generation hardware. And I think that's really cool, and I wish Sony was into doing that, because Sony doesn't appear to care about their back catalogue. They just want to sell you what's currently new, which is fine. But Xbox are doing pretty well on that. Pretty cool. You got a bunch of Xbox 360 games here, so named because it was the Xbox Revolution, I believe, and then the Xbox One was supposed to be called the Xbox All-in-One. So you had the Xbox 360, which in no way was named because the PlayStation had their third console out called the PlayStation 3, and they didn't want to be the Xbox 2 next to the Xbox 3, PlayStation 3 rather. I mean, that's just what it was. They called it the 360, so 360 sounded like more than PlayStation 3, because it's 60 more. It's just ridiculous. So allegedly the name was supposed to be Xbox Revolution, but it just means that they're in a strange, convoluted naming sequence as they move down into the newer systems, which is becoming more and more like the confusion that you get with different PC models. But I digress. Xbox 360 games, another great system, and is a system you can pick up for on the cheap right now. Games are getting pretty cheap for that system, and they are for the Xbox One as well, actually. A lot cheaper to find Xbox One games than PlayStation 4 games, I have found. Alan Wake, What an amazing game. Recently got a remaster out for your PlayStation 4 and all of that, modern consoles. Absolutely amazing game, great story in that game. Here's the Batman Arkham games. I love these games. There's a Game of the Year edition with a lenticular cover. Here is Arkham City. I have two versions of this because it has different artwork on them. If I do like a game enough, I will grab variations of the cover art. And these Arkham games are absolutely fantastic. And then I have Arkham Origins here as well. And there's Fable Anniversary, which is an updated version of the first Fable game. You also have Fable 2 and Fable 3 there as well. Great games, great role-playing games on the system. There's Fable The Journey, which is a Connect game, which is really difficult to play. And there is LA Noire, which is a fantastic game. That is the complete edition right there, which includes the extra content combined with the story. Here's Resident Evil 6 and Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City. Operation Raccoon City is an okay action game, and it's a game that you definitely need the DLC for it to be a complete game. Like, half of that game is DLC, and it will be unfortunate when that is no longer available. You can't talk about the 360 without talking about Skyrim. There's a Legendary Edition. So many hours I put onto that game, and I have a weird promotional copy version of this game as well, which is pretty cool. And here we have X-Blades. On X-Blades on the Xbox 360, there's a bunch of other X's in there, I'm sure, like Triple X, maybe XXX. People keep asking about what's my rarest game. Probably the Rare Replay Collection. That's got 30 rare games on it from Rareware Studios. It's pretty rare. Here is my smaller games here that will fit onto these shelves. A bunch of zappers above that and controllers that I will highlight here. I love my Zapper game, so I had to put... Look at that Micro Uzi there. I can't believe they released that. Here we have the TurboGrafx box games. There's a PC Engine box game as well. They have the Hue cards inside of them, even though they're in CD cases, which is kind of weird. And below that we have the Philips CDI games here. Great games on that system. I don't have many of them, but it is a fantastic system. And then below that we move into the Panasonic 3DO as well, for some games on that system as well. And man, I do love these systems. I do. They're pretty fun to collect for. Mutant Rampage Body Slam is a beat 'em up game for the CDI. There are some good games on that. The Apprentice is really good as well. And Alone in the Dark 1 and 2 are on the 3DO there, and they are great games as well. And there's also, you have D here as well, another fantastic game. So there are good games on the system. And then as well as that, you also have games, and I say the word games loosely with Blonde Justice. And if you think that was pretty crazy, how about just plain old sex? Yeah, it runs on standard 3DO hardware. This is from Vivid Interactive, which made such hits as The Coven. Yeah, that was a thing. And now we move on to, as we should move on from that, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advanced. In the box, that is. I showed you the loose cartridges previously. DS and 3DS games. Now the sides, the spines, however you want to call it, of these games often has nothing on the side, at least for the PAL versions. I don't know how it is for American Game Boy games. Like I said, for the most part, I have English versions of games, UK versions of games. A lot of the time on the side, it won't say what the game is. There's one there that you can see which is completely blank, like white. That is very awkward. And it makes it more awkward to display these. It's awkward to display the cartridges enough as it is, but when it comes to the boxes, pretty much you would need them front-facing. So I don't know how other people display their Game Boy games, but it's a bit awkward to know what they are. DS is a very underrated system, and I think that DS games are going to become more collectible and more expensive as time moves on. I'm seeing a trend with Nintendo DS games that sought-after games are becoming more expensive, and it's definitely a trend that's on the up. So if you're looking for DS games, there's a bunch that I'm looking for, like Little Red Riding Hood Zombie BBQ. That game has gone up from like £50 to like £200, and that was only released in America, so it's very hard for me to grab my hands on it with import charges and all of that stuff. If you think that you are after a DS game, I would say jump on it now, because they don't seem to be getting cheaper. There's Mystic Quest. I actually upgraded the box to that a while ago. WWF Betrayal. This is a side-scrolling beat-em-up game on the Game Boy. pretty cool. I have a couple of games here in these weird boxes, but that's because they were missing. I had the manuals, not that I was missing the manuals. There's Duke of the Monophonic Menace. That game the PAL version is incompletable. It's broken, unfortunately. Nightmare in Dreamland. But yeah, about those boxes, they were, well, speaking of boxes, there's Ready to Rumble boxing with nothing on the side of it. Bunch of Shining Force games, Resurrection of Dark Dragon there. I also had Shining Soul there as well. Here's some Pokemon games. This one does include the a wireless adapter. But yeah, I have a couple of DS cases with Game Boy Advance cartridges in them because I have the manual with them. If I did not have the manual, I would just leave them as loose. But if I have the manual, I like to keep it with them. That was, there's Shining Soul, of course, and before that we had the limited run re-release of Shantae, which is very cool. There's Sigma Star Saga, another way forward game there, which is really awesome. It has shmup elements to it and other elements to it as well, similar to the Guardian Legend. There's A Link to the Past, which also includes 4 Swords in Game Boy Advance. You've got Van Helsing there, a very crazy bootleg. I did a video about that, actually, you can check that out. So Final Fantasy games here on the DS. Like I mentioned, a lot of great games on the DS. DS had a fantastic game library, as well did the PSP, but the DS, so good. There's Chocobo Tales. There is Crystal Chronicle games there, The Ring of Fates, and Tactics A2 there as well. And you have the 4th Heroes of Light. Such great games on this system. Here's Mega Man Zero Collection. Now there's a PlayStation 4 version of that has more games on it, but the DS game is actually worth a lot of money right now. There's Resident Evil Deadly Silence, which is like a version of Resident Evil 1. Here's Solo to Robo, Red Hunter. I picked this up recently. This game is expensive as well. I picked it up cheap, but it is expensive now. Speaking of expensive, there's Fire Emblem Fates. That includes all 3 versions of that game on 1 cartridge. That is a pretty sought after game. More Pokemon here with Pokemon Y, because I like showing it off. Here's Senran Kagura Burst. And the first game has 1 scroll, and the second game has 2 scrolls. I have the collectible pre-order cards with this as well. And Deep Crimson, the second game, is actually very expensive in the PAL region, even though it doesn't have the soundtrack like the American version would. And you also saw there Spirit Camera, which was a Project Zero game. And you know what also had the soundtrack in America, but not here in the UK? Silent Hill 3, and I'm still bitter about that. I bought the Silent Hill 3 soundtrack separately, which you'll see later in the video. Well, now we're going to look at my PlayStation 1 games up on the shelf here. There's a lot of space on the shelf here intentionally, and that's so I can add extra games as I'm going. On my previous game room, there was not a lot of space, and I had ended up stacking games on the floor, and it was becoming a real problem. And I'm really glad that in this new game room, I have more space to put more stuff on the shelves, so that I can fit more games in there. I have space to grow. And that is also why I've added 2 new shelves to the game room, which you'll see later in the video. On this game room tour, they have PC games on them. But as you would have seen when I moved, if you watched the previous game room tour video since the moving, that is, I had the PC stuff in another room. That's still the plan. I may keep everything combined, as you see here, or I may move them out. I like the idea of having the PC stuff separate, because I like to treat console gaming and PC gaming separately. Console gaming is often ease of use, and PC gaming can sometimes be a little tricky when you have games that you have to find a patch for, or have specific ways to get them working. But maybe I will keep them combined. Maybe you think I should. Maybe that would be a cool thing to do. But my current plan is, on the new shelves I've added, to maybe move across the Nintendo stuff to that, and then have more room for like the PlayStation as it evolves and grows. But anyway, the PS1, they have a lot of good games for this. I have more PS2 games than PS1 games, because PS2 games are so easy to find, which is why I need more space for them. Here's Batman Forever, the arcade game. Myself and the Jonan Monkey did that on an episode of The Danger Zone. We also did Blaze and Blade, which is a cool action RPG. A lot of fun, that game. And here's Chase Express, a cool survival game. Very cool, plays a lot like the Resident Evil games. Here we have Crisis Beat, a beat-em-up game. Very cool, very fun, and it's an awesome game if you were to check that out. Here's Die Hard Trilogy, 3 different games there. You've got a platformer, a driving game, and a on-rails game. Same with Die Hard Trilogy 2, which is the lesser known of those. Got Dino Crisis here and Dino Crisis 2. Very cool survival horror games with dinosaurs. Dino Crisis 2 as well there. And you also have, at the far end here, we have Guys, which is a fighting game featuring Final Fantasy VII character. That is very cool. You got Crowd there on the cover. Here's Fear Effect, another cool survival game. And I also have Fear Effect 2 here, Retro Helix, which is very cool to have that as well. I love my horror games. Very cool. Bunch of Final Fantasies here. Here's Final Fantasy VI, and there is Final Fantasy VII. Platinum case for that, unfortunately, because I went for a bunch of different versions. With these multi-disc games, often you have disc failures, so I had to get different versions. I have 3 copies of Final Fantasy VIII, which you just saw, to have 4 working discs. And there's Final Fantasy IX, and here's Final Fantasy Anthology. I believe the American version of this had maybe different games, but it definitely had a soundtrack in. There's me being jealous about soundtracks again. There's a collector's edition of Grand Theft Auto, which includes a bunch of different Grand Theft Auto games. And there's GTA London. I think a lot of people forget that there are actually 2 GTA London games. There's Hard Edge, which is known by a different name overseas, but that's another cool survival style game. There's Judge Dredd, which is an on-rails shooter game. Very cool. Only works on the PlayStation 1. Doesn't work on PS2 because of its resolutions. There's Kudelka, which is the first game in the Shadow Hearts series. A lot of fun as well. Here's Landmaker, which is an awesome puzzle game. I love puzzle games, I have to say. Puzzle games are a lot of fun. Speaking of, here's Magical Drop 3. Another fantastic puzzle game. So much fun. Puzzle games are great for a quick play. There's Metal Gear Solid and Metal Gear Solid The Special Missions. There's a combined version of those as well, I believe. There's Parasite Eve 2. Parasite Eve, the first game, was never released over here in the UK, unfortunately. So I need to grab an American copy of that. Here's another puzzle game, Puzznic. Very cool. I do love my puzzle games. They're so much fun for just some quick play. There's Resident Evil. Unfortunately, that is the Platinum version. Here's the Director's Cut for Resident Evil. We never got the DualShock version over here, but that had crazy music in it, so maybe that's for the best. Here's Resident Evil 2. And next to that, we have Resident Evil 3, Nemesis as well. Little water damage on that. I've had, to my previous game room, I had water damage where I lost a lot of PlayStation stuff and big box PC games. There's Resident Evil Survivor. A lot of people give this game a bad reputation, but the PAL version, you can use a light gun. In the American version, you can't. So I think it's a lot better if you can use a light gun on it. There's Silent Hill. That game is actually fairly expensive these days. And there's Tekken in this really cool cardboard box. And here's Tekken 2. Unusual thing about this game is the disc art, actually. If we take a look at the disc art, I don't know what they were thinking with this disc art. It doesn't have much to do with a fighting game. But you often see that, especially with games like Dead or Alive, I expect. And here's Tekken 3. There's great extra game modes to that. Tekken Force and Tekken Bowl. Time Crisis. In later Tekken games, you got Volleyball as well. Volleyball was very popular in the Dead or Alive game series as well. Here's Wild Arms, which is a fantastic RPG with a Western, like neo-Western theme to it. And here's the new shelves I was speaking of on the right there. Just added them to the game room. I plan to maybe move the PS2 over to that, or maybe the Nintendo over to that, and then give the PS2 more room. Here's a bunch of special editions here. You saw the Resident Evil 2 Collector's Edition above that. That is absolutely massive. But a bunch of special editions here. I'm thinking of maybe getting a glass cabinet in the center of the room for these special editions. It also moves on to big box PC games here. A little bit cluttered here, a little bit all over the place, but that's just how it is right now. I recently moved a lot of the PC games in here. You can see my amiibos here as well. I'm getting into amiibo collecting. My plan is to line the outside of many of the shelves with amiibos to brighten up the look to them, especially on systems like the PS2, which look a little bit plain. I think a bunch of amiibos on the shelf might make that look a little bit more colourful, make it pop a little bit nicer. But I really like amiibos. They have a lot of detail to them. They look really cool, and it's just really fun to collect for. Although it is often hard to find them in good condition. But as I spoke to previously, I'm actively aiming to find things out in person rather than online. There's a anniversary Mario one. I believe there's a variation of that in colour as well. And a couple of Fire Emblem ones which I just picked up. Here's some computer stuff here. A couple of Atari games on the side. And then some big box PC stuff of various different computers like the Commodore onwards. Here's the Heatwave pack for the Commodore 64. Look at that guy playing his computer next to an octopus on the beach. Here's Vixen. This game was quite controversial when it came out because of the artwork. I don't have the poster included on that version. And here is Zombie Apocalypse. I believe that is an aftermarket version. And there's Barbarian. I don't believe the poster is in that either, unfortunately. We also have a bunch of other games here in various, like, computer PC and Commodore 64 and Amiga. But this is something really interesting for those old enough to know. This is a computer game that you have to code in yourself on BASIC to be able to play. Now, isn't that a blast from the past? You guys think it takes a while to download stuff on modern systems like the Xbox One? Try entering the entire game yourself in code and then playing it. Of course, we had cassette-based games with dataset games over here in the UK. They took about half an hour to load as well. So these new shelves, normally these would be empty, but for the purposes of this video, I moved a lot of PC games from where other game room where I had my PC stuff into here. So here's some more PC games. These are more of the smaller, but still slightly big box games, if that makes any sense. And at the end there, you have a Gamecom game there, Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 2 on the Gamecom is terrible. And maybe you haven't heard about that game for good reason. It is really bad. Resident Evil 2 is a fantastic game. Resident Evil 2 on the Tiger Gamecom handheld is really bad. Anyway, here's some Commodore 64 datasets. Love these. I have many more of these, but I can only fit about that many there at this time, or find them as well. And then here's some big box games, a little bit problematic because of their size. You saw more of those big box games on the previous shelf. And then there's a couple of Amiga games down there as well. A lot of my Amiga games are loose floppy disks. And here's some dual case, CD case games for the PC. These are sometimes from big boxes where I no longer have the big box, or they were just presented like that as well. There's Legend of the Amazon, Women for the Spectrum, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or Hero Turtles I should say, in the PAL region. That's right, it was called Hero Turtles in the PAL region. There's the Blair Witch Limited Edition Triple Pack, great series of survival horror games. I did a video on that. There's the Temple of Elemental Evil. And one great thing about PC game compilations like this is you can pick up, there's the Temple of Elemental Evil, and also Neverwinter Nights in totally role-playing games there. And yeah, I have to talk about the Gamecom version of Resident Evil 2. This is kind of like a Game Boy-like version of Resident Evil 2, and it is just so different. I mean, it was tough to play. I played through it and it was tough. There's Ghosts and Goblins. You can see me play it through on the channel as well if you're brave enough. Great artwork on these. I've got to talk about this Ricochet by Massatronic version of Ghostbusters value range. You could get these for very cheap in places like newsagents. And this had a loading game on it, which was Invader Load, which is an awesome version of Space Invaders. And the music was from One Man and His Droid, and it was amazing. I've got a lot of good memories to that. Not so much playing Ghostbusters. The original version of that tape I played until it broke, until the tape snapped. Did not know you could pause it after the loading game, unfortunately. There's Nocturne, a fantastic and underrated survival horror game. You can check that out. I did a video of that on the channel. It's absolutely amazing. If you're looking for hidden gems, here's Get Medieval. If you like Gauntlet, you will love this game. It is a Gauntlet style game and it's a lot of fun. And then you have the DVD style PC games at the end here. Lots of great PC games here in this style of packaging. And at the far end there, we have some floppy disks and some soundtracks as well. So many great PC games here. Command & Conquer, Black and White, so many good games. I do have a lot of fun with PC games. They are a little harder to get working, that is for sure. PC games can often be problematic to make run. It's definitely a problem, and you have to look up patches on the internet and scour the internet for tricks to make these games run, especially on modern systems. But with things like a program like DOSBox, which emulates DOS, you can certainly get a lot of these games to run more easily, especially the older ones. And with compatibility mode on your PC as well, you can get a lot of games to run. Almost all of them I can get to run. They're just difficult to run, and especially to capture as well. I actually play a lot of PC games through a capture card, through another PC into a capture card when I record them. There's Half-Life Generations, bunch of great games in there, including Blue Shift, and on Steam I was able to put my CD key for that in and get a upgraded version of all of those games, which is awesome. So I love Steam for doing that. There's Payday, an interesting game. Here's a recent RPG bundle I picked up for £1. It's called the Retro RPG Bundle, which I think is very misleading, because these are new games. They came out in 2014, I believe. They were made in some sort of RPG maker. But I got this collection for just £1, so I really can't complain about that. It is pretty awesome. Speaking of awesome, here we have Planescape Torment, a fantastic Dungeons and Dragons style game, and this is another awesome game, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. If you haven't tried that game, I recommend checking it out. And let's check out these floppy disk games. The bulk of these are for the Amiga. There's Nightwalk, which is a clone of Ghosts and Goblins, and there's a bunch of great games here, like Lamatron, which is a clone of Robotron. Many of these games came free with magazines. Cassettes would come free with magazines for the Commodore 64 as well, as the Amiga did with the floppy disks. And if you remember, in demo discs for the PlayStation 1, that was a thing as well. There's music next to this, but that's all the time we have, I'm afraid. And there you have it, that is my game room tour. If you liked the video, please leave a like or a comment to let me know what you think, and don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content. Thank you for watching, I've been MVL, and I will catch you next time.